Welcome to this week's episode of Talking Therapy. Talking Therapy is the companion podcast to my YouTube series In Therapy, where we follow brave participants on their real-life therapeutic journeys with me. So as part of my mission to break the stigma around mental health, chronic illness, frankly, the reality that we all struggle sometimes in life. And what makes those struggles easier is having support, ideas, inspiration to help us navigate through those times. And in this week's episodes, we're going to be exploring, firstly, the idea of toxic positivity. We did a post on my Instagram on Friday last week, and it went a bit viral, dare I say. And I think part of the reason why is it struck a chord for people. I think also, though, one of the struggles with doing sort of short kind of quotes or Instagram posts is you can't always go into the depth of an idea. So I wanted to break down a bit more and respond to perhaps some of the critics or some of the people that were perhaps a little offended by that post. We're going to take some ideas from Hannah's last episode around the importance of being seen and being heard and being understood. And then finally, we're going to talk a bit about some of the challenges and pressures of coming out of lockdown. I touched on this briefly last week. And just really, if you're feeling overwhelmed suddenly, going from this time where it took a while, I think, for some of us to adapt to the sort of isolation. But I think people also started to normalize to that and even started to appreciate that. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by requests or demands, I think what we're going to talk about is going to be helpful. So firstly, talking about toxic positivity. What do I actually mean by toxic positivity? Really what it is, it's when we're positive in a toxic way. What I mean by that is when we take a disproportionately positive perspective to something that's happening in a way which is disconnecting from and denying the deeper feelings and emotions that may well be going on. And toxic positivity can happen in a few ways. It can happen to ourselves. So we can use it as a way of telling ourselves to get over how we're feeling, that we're just making a mountain out of a molehill, that, things are not as bad as you're telling yourself that they are. So we use it as a way to reject and dismiss our own feelings and emotions. Another way is we use it towards other people. And by the way, I should say that often when people are using toxic positivity, it's well-intentioned. People aren't doing it to be cruel or to be unkind. They're doing it because we see someone that's unhappy or suffering. We want to lift them up. We want to help them to feel better. Another way it can happen is others doing it to us. So perhaps, one day we say, oh, I just feel so stuck and frustrated. And someone says, oh, you've got so many things to be grateful for in your life. And they sincerely mean you've got things in your life that you can be grateful for. But what do we actually feel in response? What do we experience? What we often experience is a sense of our feelings are being dismissed, that we're not being seen, that we're sort of making something, we're trying to get attention and we're complaining. The result is the problem of toxic positivity is we end up rejecting our emotions and how we feel. When we reject our emotions, they don't just disappear. It's not that you reject how you feel and then it's not there anymore. When we reject how we feel, it tends to get stuck and to get held in our body. We then end up with everything from anxiety, because we're holding on to all these feelings and emotions, to feeling emotionally numb because there's just so much stuff that we're trying not to feel that it gets locked in our system. We need things to change how we feel, like alcohol or drugs or, whatever, that might be more extreme examples. It may just be changing how we feel with food would be another example. Ultimately, you can't heal what you don't feel. And what I'm not saying is every feeling that comes up, we've got to go down a rabbit hole of exploration and feeling. What I am saying is when we consistently use toxic positivity as a way of rejecting, dismissing, trying to escape from how other people are feeling, we're not being true to ourselves. And there's a consequence, there's a price, there's a suffering ultimately that goes with that. be clear that this is not a statement or a teaching against positivity. It's toxic positivity that I'm speaking towards. Sometimes we just need to take a more optimistic view of our life, that we've got used to seeing all the problems, all the things that are wrong, focusing on the negative, and what we look for, we find. So if we keep looking for the negative, we keep finding the negative. That isn't what the problem is. The problem is when we do this in a way which actually causes more suffering. And ultimately, for our life to evolve and change, we have to see things as they are. Being overly positive, it's like having a share that's overvalued in the stock market. What goes up in a way which is unsupported must what? It comes crashing down again. Anyone that's been involved in cryptocurrency might have seen this happen a few times. Something gets inflated, there's not enough substance to support it, it then comes crashing back down again. The same is true emotionally. The problem is that most people are unrealistic in how negative they are. So a shift from being negative to being realistic might look like positive thinking, but actually we're starting to see the possibilities and the potential. So I'm not speaking out against taking an optimistic or a positive mindset in life. It's when we do it in a way which is unhelpful. It causes more pain, more suffering. And notice when we speak to others, what is the impact? If you use what might be a kind of toxically positive statement, how is that person impacted? Do they feel valued, seen, and loved by you? Or do they feel rejected? Do they feel wounded? Really paying attention to the impact of our words on others, but also, of course, our words towards ourselves. It's not often even the words themselves. It's the way the words are said. It's the place from which we say the words. If I say to you, that's really interesting, tell me more, you probably feel quite seen. If I say, yeah, it's really interesting, tell me more, you probably don't. Toxic positivity is not just the words we use, it's the way that we use the words that we use. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments below the video. Share your experiences of toxic positivity. When people have been used it towards you, when you've used it toward yourself, what's been the impact of doing that? Do also check out the original post on my Instagram. Would love people to add more reflections, comments. This is a theme that we'll come back to. I think toxic positivity is sort of a label for a much bigger idea, which I feel very deeply passionate about, which is we have to honor, we have to value our feelings and our emotions. It's critical to physical healing, it's critical to emotional healing, and ultimately living the richest, most sort of full and alive life that we ultimately can. So I want to talk a little bit now about some themes and some questions that came from you guys out of a recent episode with Hannah. In this episode, I was exploring with Hannah the importance of being open and honest, of expressing, of sharing the truth of where she was at in her recovery process with friends and family, and reaching out and asking for support. Here's a clip from that episode.
So I said to a friend, like, I feel like I don't have good perspective on how often I like asking for support or talk about just my illness, because for me it's all consuming, it's my life, and it can feel like I'm doing the same around other people. And she said that it wasn't like that at all. It was actually, she thought that considering what I'm going through, I rarely spoke about it.
How did that feel to hear her say that?
It made a lot of sense, because I think I so badly want to talk about it, and I so badly want to feel like the people closest to me understand, but I find it so hard, and then that kind of just fuels this feeling of anger, like the world doesn't,
It's like you're angry at the world for not supporting you, but actually the world does want to support you, but you're projecting a history onto the world. So off the back of this episode, there were some questions emailed in to hello@alexhoward.com. Please do send in questions. You can also post comments below the videos. Sarah said, how do you deal with the situation when you try to open up to friends or family and they shut you down or ignore you? I've had a recent situation where I have put myself out there telling friends and family that I felt housebound due to ME, Lyme, fibromyalgia, and autoimmune disease. They then change the subject or ignore my messages. I understand they can only see through the lens of their own experiences, but it hurts a lot. I'm working on processing emotions through journaling. So, Sarah, I think the first thing to say is it does hurt. Like, that's part of the truth of the experience, that it's painful to reach out and to ask for support and to not receive that support that you're asking for. If that's the case for you, firstly, just don't be toxically positive about it. Like, let yourself feel the impact and the truth of how that feels for you. What I would also say, though, is the more comfortable that we can become with our circumstances, as much as we may not want those circumstances, the less, I guess what I'm saying is the less our own inner critic is judging us and beating us up and everything else, the less we need the validation of others. We may still want the emotional holding and support, but we don't need them to legitimize the reality of our lived experience. I would also say sometimes we have to choose carefully who it is we reach out to. Not everyone's equal in their capacity to meet us and hold us emotionally. And sometimes the people that we most long for that support from are the people least capable and able to give that to us. And if that's the case, it's trying to find friends or people in your wider network that actually may have the capacity to meet you and hold you ultimately in that place. Finally, sometimes we've got to take the time, it's like the last thing you might feel like doing, but to try and educate people. Send them links to online videos, send them links to resources. Some people would just not look at any of that stuff, and that's part of the sort of frustration that we feel. But doing the best you can to try and give people at least the opportunity to go deeper. But I think what you're speaking to is a very shared experience a lot of people have had, and I just want to acknowledge that it's hard. So there's a question here on YouTube. I find it very hard to be open about what I'm feeling and need to others. And when I'm more stressed and feeling worse, the harder it is. Kind of like the worse I feel, the harder I am on myself, the more it feels unsafe to share. How would you approach this? And how do we deal with people very close to us that can be of support, but can also be a big source of stress? So I think the first thing I'd speak to here is, I'm not going to go into a whole piece about this, but something called polyvagal theory that looks at the impact of stress on our biology and our nervous system. When we're in a calm, healing state, we're in what's called a state of safe and social. And in safe and social, we're much more able to read visual cues in an accurate way. We're more able to be emotionally open and to connect to others. When our state changes, the more wired our system becomes, the less able that we are to then be open. And that is a biological process. Working on calming your system is the key. Trying to be open and vulnerable from a really wired place, it's a biologically difficult thing to do. Work on calming your system. Notice the triggers that cause you to get ramped up in that way in the first place. And when you're feeling good and feeling resourced, from that place, capitalize on that. So from that place, deliberately spend the time reaching out and connecting so you feel more supported in more relationships when you're in that less resourceful space. Finally, is a question from Jill. To calm the nervous system, do you need to do mindful exercises every day? So Jill, you don't need to do mindful exercises every day for the rest of your life. I think, there's what we tend to go through is chapters of time where we need to really commit to those practices. And there might be a sort of continuation program after that period. But for example, in the reset program, I particularly ask people to focus for that 12-week period. A lot can happen and shift in our nervous system in a really dedicated and committed 12-week window of time. But you may well find some kind of maintenance practice is really helpful and supportive. It certainly is for a lot of people. And It's finding that right cadence and rhythm. And sometimes it's like a pendulum that we've really not paid attention to our system. And that pendulum needs to swing to a bit of, bump the mic, might need to swing to a bit of an extreme for a period of time to then help us find ourselves back in that place of balance. So finally, I wanted just to speak a little bit to some of the overwhelm that I think people are starting to experience as lockdown is lifting. It's like we've gone from having nothing to do in terms of social interaction to suddenly feeling overloaded and overwhelmed with all of the opportunities. Just a few quick thoughts in sort of in the end of this podcast. Firstly, saying no to others is often saying yes to ourselves. Remembering we have to be the defender and the protector of our own needs and emotions, and to not feel ashamed or embarrassed of the fact that that's important. If we've got helper patterns, we can have a big tendency to make everyone else's needs more important. And ultimately, that's not a healthy place from which to live your life. Control your diary. This is something that I talked to, I think, Lauren about in an episode once, that pick a couple of nights a week, which are the nights you go out, and other nights know that you may need rest and you may need time with yourself. And that's not a weakness. That's a strength to recognize that that's what you and that's what your body ultimately need. Listen to your body. Listen to your emotions. They know what they're talking about. And so ultimately, it's not kind of going and binging on that contact because we've not had it. It's designing your life the way that you want it. So you are the architect, not the victim of suddenly just all of these demands and all of these pressures that can suddenly come in before we know it too quickly. So I hope that's been helpful. Couple of things to let you know. We've been putting out some more meditations on my YouTube channel. Please do check them out. Last Sunday, we put out a meditation for deep rest. These are hopefully a great resource as we build that library of meditations to work with. This week is the Fatigue Super Conference. If you're not signed up, get signed up, fatiguesuperconference.com. Over 40 of the world's leading experts on fatigue, daily case studies, recovery stories, all brand new content. I'm super proud of it. Do check it out. Finally, keep sending in your questions to this podcast. It really helps me get a sense of what's helpful, what's not helpful in the teachings and the content. It also provides the material for the podcast. Please email hello@alexhoward.com or post below any of the videos on YouTube. Hope that's been helpful. Thank you for watching. As always, be kind to yourself. Go gently.